It is 5 o'clock, September 17th. I will now call this special council meeting to order. And we'll start with the territorial acknowledgement. In the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge with respect the history and living culture of the Anishinaabe, the people of the three fires known as Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi Nation, who have inhabited this land from time immemorial. We recognize that these lands are the territories of the Chippewas of Saugeen and the Chippewas of Nawash, collectively known as the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, the keepers of this land. Georgian Bluffs is located on lands encompassed by treaties 45.5, 67, 72, 82, and 93. We reflect on our role as treaty people and the need to live in respect and peace and show respect to the First Peoples who inhabit these lands and waters. Moving on to approval of the agenda, a recommendation is that the agenda be approved as presented. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Deputy Mayor Pringle, Councillor Coburn, is there any discussion? Seeing none, I will call the vote. All in favor? That is carried. Presentations. Any person who wishes to make a presentation to council must register with the clerk at least 7 days in advance of the scheduled meeting. To register, you can complete the online delegation form at www.georgianbluffs.ca/delegations. Call the clerk's office at 519-376-2729, extension 601. And I understand this evening we have MNP presenting our draft financial statements. So the recommendation is pardon?
So sorry. MNP is not arrived yet, so it may be beneficial to defer this item to a later point in the agenda.
Okay.
Carry on as normal.
Okay, so we will come back to this. We will move on to staff reports then. 5.1, the vacant council seat. The recommendation is whereas Councillor Ryan Thompson provided written notice of his resignation from office with the clerk on September 5th, 2025, in accordance with the notice requirements defined in Section 260 of the Municipal Act 2001, and whereas council passed a resolution at their meeting on September 10th to declare the seat vacant in accordance with Section 262, subsection 1 of the Act, and whereas where a vacancy occurs, a municipality is required to fill it in accordance with Section 263, subsection 1 of the Act, and in accordance with the rules prescribed in Section 263, subsection 5. Now, therefore, that council directs staff to prepare an open call for applications in accordance with Section 263, subsection 1A. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Shouldice. Deputy Mayor Pringle. And I will turn to the clerk for comments on this report before we start discussions.
Thank you, Mayor Carlton. Through you. As outlined in the report, we did receive the notice of resignation and it was effective at council's last meeting. Council does have 60 days to fill the vacancy if they opt to go with the appointment process. So within the report, it does outline the appropriate sections of the legislation, which discuss how council can go about filling that vacancy, either by the appointment process, as just mentioned, or by a by-election. In the report, it's contemplated that because we're more than 90 days from a regular election, we do have to fill the vacancy. And because the municipal election is just over a year away, and there are some fairly significant costs associated with administering a by-election that has not been staff's recommendation within this report, but is certainly an option that is available to council. So just based on the cost and in the interest of filling the vacancy as soon as possible, given that there's less than a year left by the time the new member would be onboarded, the recommendation is that we advertise and accept applications and that council go through a review process and select an applicant from an open call to the public.
Okay, thank you for those comments. I will turn to council for comments. Councillor Winters.
Thank you. I'm just, it makes sense we have to fill the seat. I agreed on having an election. There's a cost to that. Within a matter of open, transparent, and fairness, we in this term have already filled a vacant councillor seat with appointing the next person that had the next corresponding votes. And I'm not sure that at this stage, going elsewhere makes that look like it's open, fair, and transparent. And I really think that as a council member, I don't feel comfortable looking through applications saying that I think I know what the ratepayers are looking for. I think we should go back and look at what the ratepayers themselves did in the last vote. I don't feel comfortable sitting here going through a bunch of lists, and to me, that seems a little prejudice that we're looking for people that we think will fit the mold. We all shouldn't be the same in this room. So I don't know what makes us think that we can sit down and pick the next candidate for a municipal council seat. My recommendation would be to do the same process we did when we filled the seat that Councillor Scholz occupies.
So if I could comment on that, and the clerk can correct me if I'm wrong, that we used the last election as sort of our guideline last time rather than going out to an application process, because at the time that the other person's resignation took effect, we hadn't even been acclaimed or not acclaimed, sworn in to council. So it was still, we were choosing that next person, but it was still an appointment process that we were using because that was council's option. But am I correct in that it wasn't an election, that anybody who didn't get in within that first criteria is not elected? Okay.
Thank you, Mayor Compton, for you. That is correct. Either process you look at, it is still an appointment. So if I could provide some commentary as well, as to why that wasn't contemplated in this report is because it's not contemplated in the legislation. So it's not actually a very common process for a council 3 years out from an election to select the candidate with the next amount of votes. It's not a process that is contemplated very commonly. In fact, the application process is the most common. And yes, the election was 3 years ago. A lot has probably changed since then, including the candidate who actually was elected. Things change in 3 years. So if you were contemplating that, for example, you could contemplate that, that person who was elected may have the ability to be on council, and therefore I didn't contemplate it in this report just because there are a number of factors that go into that. I would say that if both of those candidates that ran in the last election were interested in serving on council, then the application process could cover that off as well. If they're interested, they could apply to be on council, and that could be used as sort of a mitigating factor in consideration of the applications. Just that it's not a very common practice for a council to take when they have a vacancy this late in the term. And it's just, it's way more common to do the application process. Sorry, that wasn't very eloquently put, but.
Okay. Thank you for that. Councillor Day.
I appreciate Councillor Winter's question and query about our process previously, and I really think it was important to have an open and transparent conversation about that option and why we used it last time. I also support using an application process at this point in time, given the time that has passed since the election and many of the things that our clerk has already explained.
Thank you. Mayor Frankel.
Yeah, thanks for the problem. Yeah, I guess I'm kind of, when we're only less than a year away from having another election and things go in that direction, I think with the application side of things, and I'm glad Carly mentioned that anybody that did run in the last election can certainly put in an application to do so. And then that person will have the opportunity to be on probably for about 9 months. And then they have the opportunity to decide whether they even want to be a part of this or not, or just and not be part of it. And then after, I guess that process, in my mind, if that process ends, when we get into the election period, the taxpayer will decide whether they want that person or not. So I guess I look at it as simplicity right now with the application, cost savings to hopefully the taxpayer, and we can just pick the right individual, and then the elector can decide after that whether he runs or doesn't run. So, or runs himself. So just comment.
Further comments?
Through you, Mayor Carlton, to the clerk, what types of questions are asked on the application form?
Thank you, through you. So the application form that we would put in place would be quite similar to the one that we utilize for appointments to committees and boards. So in this case, the report does contemplate in an application process that council use obviously all the criteria that would make somebody eligible to run for council. But it contemplates some reasons for their interest in the council process, and maybe some past experience that they might have on other councils or committees and boards, and just a little bit about their background to ensure that, there's some diversity in council, and just so there's enough information in the application for council to get to understand somebody's background and their interest. Again, very similar to what we've done with committees and boards. And we have also asked in the draft application, should council choose to go that way, that they provide some type of CV or resume so that you have some idea of, what they do outside of council in terms of a job, and just really a little bit about that individual so that council can get to know them a little bit through the process.
That's cool.
I agree for us to record it, but it's.
Yep. So,
I'll make a quick comment.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, again, I'm open to all the comments and open-minded. It's just I'm sitting here going, do I feel comfortable making a subjective decision based on, well, we got a bunch of resumes. I'm building a sports team, so I'm going to stack the team. Does that represent the ratepayers of Georgian Bluffs? We weren't all lucky because we got along and we were friends and we ran in the same group. We all came from different backgrounds, different things. And my gut feeling is sitting here, we're going to try to, right or wrong, intentionally or unintentionally, is look at, this is what we feel makes our team and this is going to make us work. Is that representing the ratepayers? I don't believe it does. I really don't. We only have a year left. There's not a lot of time left. It's going to be less meetings next year. But I don't feel comfortable looking for an application because we're going to sit here and go, yeah, we like that person. Will they stay? Will they not stay? Will they do this? Will they do that? I've been through this process. I don't think it's the right process.
Councillor Shoulders and then Councillor Coburn.
I think I'll go as far as I would support the application process, but my question to Carly is, how does someone apply to that position? Is this going to be something online through the Georgian Bluffs website that they can go right onto and drop their resume and cover letter into it, or for clarity, what would that process look like?
Thank you, Mayor Carlton, through you. Yes, we would have an online application available, and for accessibility, we would of course also have paper copies available for an individual to fill out if they were interested.
Okay.
Councillor Coburn.
So I would just say that we do this all the time when we're selecting board members, committee members. We look at skill and experience. So I don't see this as any different. I would also say that the election was 3 years ago, and there could be some of us up here who folks voted for us who might not vote for us next time when they did 3 years ago. So a lot of things can change in 3 years, and I think that's what our clerk was getting at. And so I support the recommendation as well. And I'm just requesting a report.
There are no other comments said by anyone. I will call the vote and turn it over to the clerk.
Thank you, Mayor Carlton, for you. A recorded vote has been requested. When I call your name, please indicate your vote for or against the recommendation. Councillor Isaac Schuldes,
For.
Councillor Tobin Day,
For.
Councillor Rick Winters,
Against?
Councillor Kathy Moore Coburn,
For.
Deputy Mayor Grant Pringle,
Or,
and Mayor Sue Carlton.
4.
Thank you, that carries.
Thank you. Do we know where we're at with MNP?
She was on her way.
Okay, so we'll move on to committee vacancies and she gets her. Recommendation is that council provide direction on resulting committee vacancies, including any temporary appointments, and that a member be appointed to the Committee of Adjustment effective immediately. Could I have a mover and seconder, please? Councillor Coburn, Councillor Scholdice. I'm going to turn to staff on this one for how you think we should go ahead with putting somebody on Committee of Adjustment immediately and how we're doing that selection. I guess I question because I think on all the committees, we would like to have that full slate of council here to be able to make the appointments. And we don't have that, but I understand there is an importance to Committee of Adjustment.
Thank you, Mayor Carlton, through you. Yes, ideally, if there was a member of council who was interested in serving the remainder of the term on Committee of Adjustment, we could provide that committee with the stability. But of course, only if somebody was willing to volunteer to serve the remainder of that term. Mr. Thompson was the chair of that board, and so they are working with their deputy chair, filling the position and doing quite well. But I'm sure the board would like to have that vacancy filled and then be able to sort out a more permanent chair situation for the remainder of the term. So the report does reflect that recommendation to address that one immediately. There are the other appointments to the Grey County Farm Safety Association and the Owen Sound and North Grey Union Public Library Board. Those are appointments that council could deal with at a later date if they wanted to, but I do believe the library is heading into budget discussions, and I think they were hoping to have some representation from Georgian Bluffs at that time as well. So the report does contemplate potentially a temporary appointment until a new member is brought on board, and the appointments can be reviewed at that time.
I'm maybe going to turn this opposite and start at the bottom of the list and work up. So, library board.
I would volunteer for the library board position on a temporary and until the end of term basis, depending on council preference. I attended the AMO presentations about libraries this August and always speak to the Public Ontario Library representative at AMO conferences, and also just having a strong interest in the importance of libraries in our communities, in all communities. So that's when I feel comfortable stepping into as a bi-monthly meeting on a night that I am generally free.
Okay. Anyone else interested in library? Okay, we may have that.
So we'll do that.
Yes, that's right.
I will not volunteer for any adjustment though. Grey County Farm Safety.
I'd happily sit on that for sure. Question to staff is, you talked about preferences for the appointment and confirming the township status in the committee, and then how frequently are they meeting currently? I am the backup on that with, for Ryan, but I haven't been to one yet, so if we could pick up a little more info on that.
Thank you, Mayor Carlton, for you. I'm actually trying to obtain that information personally. I'm not aware of how frequently they meet.
Okay.
But maybe someone in the audience.
Excuse me. I was going to email you. If it pleases you, Mayor.
You may have to come up here for the microphones to pick up.
Thank you. Ryan Thompson, former member of the Farm Safety Committee. It has been a bit of an irregular schedule, but they typically have shot for every other month, and it's the last Thursday of the month. Now, they've had trouble recently and haven't called a lot of meetings, so I can only speak to the period just before May because I don't have access to the emails after that. But typically, the schedule is every other month, last Thursday of the month in Markdale at the county building. So I think you'd be an excellent representative, and it's a good committee.
And the same thing, I'll look to others to say, does anyone else have an interest? Do you have another comment?
I was just gonna finish that conversation by saying if there's anybody who wants that, that's fine, but I'd be more than happy to sit on that board, for sure, yeah.
Okay. It looks like that one's
Thank you.
for you.
Thank you.
Okay, Committee of Adjustment, now that we have those two out of the way. Councillor Coburn, you're already on there.
I'm on it, and if I may, we have one Committee of Adjustment member who is particularly strong, and without him, I frankly don't know where we'd be. And he's a community member. I remember when we switched from all council for that committee to a mixture, I was a proponent of having all community members. And having sat on this committee, I can tell you, some of them are way more capable than council members who don't have a planning background. I wish we could fill it with another community member who's well qualified, but I don't know that we have the time to do the call out for applications and get someone trained up in time to make a difference. So that's just my 2 cents worth. It is a big commitment. There's a lot of reading, but even before the reading, there's a lot of understanding that you need, and I'm still learning around the whole process. So I don't know how our clerk might feel about another community member, if there's, council feels there's time to do that, or should we try to fill it quickly?
Mayor Carlton, through you, I would lend my support to council trending in that direction if they would like to, but it does involve amending the procedure bylaw to adjust that composition, which would probably delay an appointment process a little bit further. I think it's probably a great suggestion going into the next term of council to consider, but in the interest of the committee getting some stability in a timely fashion, I am recommending that another member of council be appointed, and that's a process we can certainly look at making the change if council wish to go that direction.
Just a question. At the end of this term of council, do these current committee members carry on with their appointments? Or does it come up for reapplication to appoint a new Committee of Adjustment in the next term of council?
Thank you, Mayor Carlton, through you. They are the same term as council, so it will be a new application process going into the next term of council.
So it's not unusual to have a gap in time where we don't have, in that case, a Committee of Adjustment at all. I guess what I'm thinking is there an issue with having a gap in one member while we looked at changing procedural bylaw and bringing another community member up?
Can I respond to that?
Yeah, go ahead.
I like the way you're thinking. It's such a small committee, and if we happen to have someone else unable to come, then we don't have quorum. That would be my concern.
Thank you. Through Mayor Carlton, thank you. That was the point I was going to bring up about quorum, just that it does have an impact. I know that there are a couple members of that committee who do travel frequently, and I think that they do try to attend from where they are, but I think, it would be an impact to that quorum as well. But this will actually be because it's a new structure with the committee members, this will actually be the first time that we're in a position where we have to recruit for that committee after an election. But those call outs would certainly be happening while we were onboarding the new council for appointment as soon as possible. So it's certainly something that we would be addressing to minimize a gap between the council terms.
Deputy Mayor Pringle.
Thanks, Mayor Carlton. Were the meetings virtually or in person majority?
We've moved to an all,
That's okay, go ahead.
Mayor Carlton, we moved to an all virtual. I'm not sure, that comes with some pros and it also comes with some cons, as we've seen most recently, but it is virtual only.
So if we could consider starting that process of changing the procedural bylaw leading up to the end of the term, I've been on Committee of Adjustment before. I would be willing to be that fill-in through until the next term. and know that I have a lot of reading to catch up on what I've missed in 3 years. If no one else wants, are you considering it?
If you weren't, I probably would, but yeah, you're willing, that's good.
Okay, so we need a motion in place. I'm going to turn to the clerk to draft that motion for us. Or we're actually amending the motion then that's on the floor.
Thank you. Apologies for taking a minute there. So based on the discussion, we have some volunteers, and I'll read out this amended recommendation. So if the motion was amended to reflect these appointments, it could read something like that Councillor Tobin Day be appointed to the library board for the remainder of the term, and that Councillor Isaac Schuldeis be appointed to the Grey County Farm Safety Association for the remainder of the term, and that Mayor Sue Carlton be appointed to the Committee of Adjustment for the remainder of the term, and that staff be directed to take all necessary administrative actions to amend the committee's composition to replace a member of council with a community member.
Just a question on that. On the other two items, farm safety and library board, are we going to the end of the term, or are we only doing temporary until we have the 7th member of council on, and perhaps give that person options of, I guess that's where I thought we were going in some ways. But I'm okay with the other if it's going to end of term.
For you, Mayor Carlton, it's completely up to council. I know that Councillor Day had offered to see the library board through the remainder of the term, but it is totally up to council in terms of the length of those commitments.
I'd be more than happy to sit on the Farm Safety Association meeting until the end of the term, but if the new council member wants a committee to be involved with it, I'd be happy to give it up to them.
I think that's one of the things to consider, is that whoever gets chosen as the new council member
Should sit on it.
is not going to have any committees at all, which kind of lessens their involvement.
Thank you, Mayor Carlton, through you. Yeah, it's certainly a discussion that council could have at that time. Less than a year is a lot to kind of get under the belt and you know, figure out how to be a counselor. So they may or may not be missing committees, but it's certainly something that we could revisit once the new member is onboarded and oriented.
And if I may, I think considering some of our other committees as well, not just the ones that we're filling tonight, because I certainly have my share at least of committees, and would be happy to offer up if the successful applicant has an interest.
Okay. So we need a mover and seconder for the amended motion, correct?
Through you, Mayor Carlton, I'm just adding a line to what I've already read, just to recommend that committees be revisited when the new member is brought on board. So if everybody's okay with that, just a mover and seconder to amend the original motion.
Okay. Councillor Day, Councillor Coburn, any further discussion? Seeing none, I will call the vote. All in favor? That is carried. And back to the main motion, I will call the vote on that as well. All in favor? And that is carried. Okay. Back to item 4.1, MNP 2024 draft financial statements. Recommendation is that the 2024 draft financial statements be received for information. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Deputy Mayor Pringle, Councillor Winters. I'll turn it over to you, Tracy. Welcome.
Good evening. Thank you. I'd like to thank the council for having me here this evening. I'd like to thank Samantha and her team for all their assistance during the audit. This is the first year that I'm presenting to you as MMP. As of January 1st of this year, 21 rural offices of BDO were transitioned to MMP. So all the offices in Grey County and Bruce County, from Collingwood down to Orangeville, and we are all now operating under the umbrella of MMP. So MMP is a Canadian national firm. So we still have the resources of a national firm to offer any services that need to be provided. In your council package, there is the audit findings report. It's the one with the fuzzy picture. So the fuzzy picture is meant to be fuzzy. That is MMP's logo. It wasn't a misprint. So as your auditor, we're required to communicate with council on an annual basis. This report is very similar to the BDO report because the accounting standards prescribe what the content of the communication to those charged with governance is on an annual basis. So you see the same things over from year to year. I won't go into it in a lot of detail. I will just highlight a couple of things. So the financial statements are in draft, so they do need approval. Once they have approval, then we need to do some subsequent work up to that approval date, and we need to obtain a representation letter and do subsequent events up until that approval date. Under the significant audit and accounting and reporting matters, just want to highlight the materiality. Materiality for our audit was $550,000. That's based on 3% of average revenues, which is standard for public sector entities. We are required to communicate with those charged with governance if we find any deficiencies in internal controls during our audit. Would like to happily report that your management team does a great job. So there were no deficiencies in any of the testing that we did during the year. Just highlight a couple of other things here. I'll go through the commitments and contingencies when we look at the draft financial statements. I want to highlight, I need to confirm that we are independent, as BDO was independent, MMP is independent, so we're required to communicate that on an annual basis. And in terms of unadjusted differences, there was one small unadjusted difference that is attached to the representation letter. It was not material, so we can issue we can go forward and issue our audit report. So that's kind of some of the highlights from that letter. Is there any questions? And I'll just
Questions from anyone? Councilor Colbert?
There'll be opportunity for questions later.
Yeah, I just that was the wordy part. So now we get into the part that I like, financial statements. So the draft financial statements are also in your package. Starting at the auditor's report. So again, this audit report is issued under MMP. So there is a paragraph on the second page, other matter, that says that the previous financial statements for 2023 were audited by another auditor. So even though it was the same engagement team, we are signing under a different umbrella. So we have to make that communication in the auditor's report. Our opinion is in the second paragraph. It is qualified again this year for the asset retirement obligation standards. So the asset retirement standard obligation required a liability to be calculated for things like asbestos for the retirement of capital assets. So your management team is still working through that process and going to be doing that as part of your facilities review. And so the audit report is qualified for that aspect. However, Except for that, we do give a clean opinion on the rest of the financial statements, that they are prepared in accordance with accounting standards for public sector entities. The audit report goes on to talk about the responsibilities of management and those charged with governance, and then it also deals with the responsibilities of the auditor. On page 5 is the statement of financial position. So this is the balance sheet. So a statement at a point in time on December 31st of 2024, which is the year end. So on December 31st of 2024, the township had $28.5 million in assets. The largest part of that is the cash, so $26 million in cash. It increased slightly over the prior year, and that's because the reserves increased also. So as your reserves increase, your the cash also increases. You also had an increase in the deferred revenue, which is under the liability section. So that deferred revenue is mostly made up of unspent grants. So you had the old gas tax, or the Canada Building, I forget what it's called now, the Canada Building Grant. So you had to receive some money that you hadn't spent during this fiscal year, so that is available for you to spend in future years. So again, that's under the liability section with the deferred revenue, and that's why that increased from the prior year. And because that's cash that you're holding, that also increases your cash balance as well as the reserves. The taxes and other receivables, they actually decreased from the prior year. If you remember at this point last year when we were talking about the financial statements, you had just finished the Elm Street reconstruction. So there was some money coming in for grants and to offset some of those expenses. So that was in last year's receivables. And it was also in last year's accounts payable. So you'll see that the accounts payable in the prior year were 7.1. They decreased 4.6, and a lot of that that amount that's of the decrease was because you still had to pay for you had to pay for those expenses after the year end. That brings you down to the net financial assets. So that's an important financial indicator. It's positive means that you do have resources available for the future. You have reserves. You had an increase in your net financial assets. And again, that's because you have put money into your reserves during the year. The tangible capital assets were $51.8 million. So that's all the land and the buildings and equipment. Those are recorded at cost, less amortization. So it's important to note that that's not at net realizable. That's not at net realizable value. So some of those assets could be fairly old and they're reported at cost. And then that comes down to the accumulated surplus of $74.6 million. So the accumulated surplus includes your reserves. And your reserves totaled $23.8 million of that is your reserves, and your net invested in capital assets was $51 million invested in capital assets. The next page is the statement of operations. So these are the transactions, all the revenues and expenses that were incurred by the township during 2024. The total revenues were $19.6 million. The expenses totaled $18.3 million. The revenues include all of the revenues for operating and capital purposes. The expenses include only your operating expenses and amortization, so it does not include capital assets and it does not include any transfers to or from reserves. when you look at the columns, the budget column for the expenses at 15.2 compared to the actual 8.3, it doesn't mean that you overspent by that amount at all. The 18.3 includes amortization, which is not required to be budgeted for your cash budgeting process. So you can't. So I want to make clear that you're not overspent in those expenses. That brings you down to the annual surplus. The annual surplus of 1.3 million is the revenues less the expenses. And again, that's important to note that that's not your operating surplus. That's not the surplus that is determined by your budgeting process. The amount of the operating surplus for 2024 was 371,000, and it was transferred to reserve prior to the year end, so it is included in your transfers to reserve. So then the next page is the statement of changes in net financial assets. So this is where we take that annual surplus. So the annual surplus is focused on the long term. So it should always be positive, and it should always be a large number, because from that annual surplus, then you do have to pay for your capital assets, and you have to pay for your long-term debt. So we take the annual surplus of 1.3 and adjust for the amortization that was included in the expenses, and take off the actual capital assets that were purchased during the year, which brings us down to the increase in net financial assets of $3 million. So again, the increase in net financial assets can be positive or negative depending on whether you were anticipating taking money out of reserve or putting money into reserve, just depending on where you are in your capital asset planning schedule. I'm running out of breath. So you had budgeted for 759, but you had $3 million because some of the capital projects didn't go forward, so you didn't take the money out of the reserves. So that's highlight of the financial statements. I'm not going to go into too much more detail unless anyone has any specific questions.
Thank you. We'll turn to council for questions. Councilor Colbert, did you?
Thank you. Through you to Tracy. Good to see you again. This is not anything to do with the specifics of what you've just reviewed, but I'll go ahead and ask it anyway. We have a new board, Police Services Board. And I'm not sure if it started last year technically or this year, but it is administered by Georgian Bluffs. And we've been told as a board that the auditing or whether it's an engagement or whatever, will be covered by your processes along with the rest of Georgian Bluffs. So I'm just wondering if that has been done, or would we be starting that for 2025?
Yes, so we have not been engaged to do that so far. I know you didn't really get started on it in 2024. It is not included in these financial statements. I know we were looking at who actually controls that and whether that should be a separate engagement. So I will have to, I can deal with your management team to see if we need to start an audit for that, but it at this point has not yet been done.
So not necessary that it, given that it kind of did start in 2024, but the official swearing in of the board didn't happen until 2025. I just want to make sure we have a meeting coming up. And I know that's one of the questions that's been asked. So I think I hear you say that it wasn't necessary to include in this audit for 2024.
Correct, it was not.
Thank you.
Could I just expand upon that, that it would be a separate audit while it's being administered by Georgian Bluffs? Would it be a separate? And I see Sam maybe has an answer here.
So through you, the board is not required to have an audit. They can opt into having an audit.
We are still trying to evaluate and determine how it should be consolidated into the 10 participating municipalities, 9? Not the number, four numbers. 9. The 9 contributing municipalities. So we're still waiting and trying to get the best direction on that. Our policies and our internal procedures and policies around cash management, they're all covered and they adhere. Georgian Bluff's policies are what MNP, I was going to say the wrong company, audits to, that they follow the same, and they could potentially get pulled for testing.
So it would be treated differently to ITFD and Biodigester.
Because it does not have the audit requirement, it is different in that sense.
Councillor Day.
On a different topic, through you, Mayor Carlton, to staff or Tracy, whoever's best person to answer this question. I'm curious about the Canada Building Grant and that being deferred revenue for next year. Go ahead.
Thank you, and through you. So the reason it was deferred is because as part of the 2025 budget, Council had elected to have $500,000 of that Canada Community Building Fund CCBF be used towards Potawatomi water system, as we did not have any expenditures occurred during 2024. It's remaining as deferred revenue at this time to still asterisk that $500,000 to come from that fund for that.
The second part of that question, and you very accurately predicted what I was going to ask, is some granting bodies in some circumstances, if you don't spend it that year, it has impacts on future grant opportunities. Is there any impacts in this with this in the long run for us?
Through you, we are still in compliance with the CCBF. We were selected in 2024 to have a CCBF audit completed, and I'm happy to say that today we received the results that we
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, I will call the vote. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you, Tracy.
Thank you for having me.
So we have no closed session and we're on to confirming bylaw. Recommendation that bylaw number 2025-059, being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of council on September 17th, 2025, be read a first, second, and third time, finally passed, signed by the mayor and clerk, sealed with the seal of the corporation, and engrossed in the bylaw book. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Coburn, Councillor Winters. Any discussion? All in favor? It's carried. Thank you. And date of next regular meeting is October 1st at 5 p.m. And the recommendation now is that the meeting be adjourned at 5:47 p.m. Deputy Mayor Pringle, seconder, Councillor Scholdice, all in favor. That is carried. Thank you.